Hello, my name is Adrian Warner, and I'm going to talk to you through my own personal experience of recovery from a near-fatal brain injury, which may be of some value to you as a neuronal professional, or perhaps to help you in your recovery from brain injury. So, in 1993, I had two brain injuries, one intracranial hemorrhage, which caused my RTA, and then a consequent subarachnoid hemorrhage when I hit the tree. These were precursored by the distinctive thunderclap headache. I went through 15 nightmarish years of regaining widespread functionality, severe recurring on-off depression, and grieving myself due to the massive personality changes in me. I re-established my original chosen profession of graphic designer, even while I was very ill, but this led to relentless problems over the 8 years I attempted it, many of what society would call timekeeping, or keep working under pressure, and that's obviously what it looked like. When push came to shove 16 years after my injury, I realised I needed to study psychology to understand A, what was wrong about my brain, and B, how to overcome the problems in processing it gave me. I saw studying for my Bachelor of Science degree as my only remaining means to enable me to iron out all the loose ends of my cognitive rehabilitation and to finally put an end to the recurring effects of PTSD, which had lasted over 15 years. Throughout this time, and more recently, I have also substantially worked and volunteered with ABI and neurological disorders. To this day, over 20 doctors and physicians have suggested that my weaning myself off medication so quickly aided my recovery. So what is spectatorship? Spectatorship is a state where an individual has lost all understanding of physicality and self-awareness, instead believing that they are merely a spectator of the world, bearing no part in it. They become trapped within their own subconscious. And what I can remember, that's quite a beautiful place to be. But, as such, they can only be observers of the world. Beating spectatorship is a way of explaining the steps that I myself took which led me to my full recovery, and to learn how to engage myself with the world, and in society, and within my own body. I feel that we have a duty to do everything we can to ward off spectatorship. So the salient points of this presentation are really that early and regular assessment of the brain activity and cognitive function is imperative. Throughout this presentation, I will highlight 7 points which are fundamental to aid recovery. These are my 7 motivational imperatives to stimulate recovery, but we can abbreviate that to recovery stimuli. First and foremost, the survivor cannot have any idea what has happened to them. Family and professionals around them are at an advantage to help recall, remind and prompt. The survivor needs help and encouragement to build awareness of themselves, gently yet assertively, calmly yet proactively. Severe memory problems only exacerbate the situation. Familiarity does not exist. Each moment is new every time. So rehearsal and repetition is a fundamental aid to get reconnections in the brain to be made. Sorry, I should have apologized. I should have warned you about this photo. This photo shows my car accident. You can see where I was driving. Obviously, it's a right-hand drive and we're in England. I was in a coma for 17 nights and in an induced coma for a further 3 weeks. I think my lowest GCS was 5. But I know that there were a very definite moment when I realised something bad had happened. because I was aware that no one could hear me, even though I could hear myself. I realised that no one could see me move my fingers and legs when I was asked to, even though I felt like I was moving them. I also realised that I could not see or make sense of anything around me, nor did I know where I was. The one thing I did recognise was the very distinctive voices of my profoundly deaf parents, and that in itself was probably the most pivotal realisation. To develop, to understand, and to appreciate. These have been the goals of my rehabilitation and were paramount at every stage. I found that problems would only recur if I did not understand each hurdle. I was inspired by my family and my friends to appreciate my surroundings and the world. So the first recovery stimuli. The importance of professionals understanding and appreciating the confusion, fear and anxiety that ABI provokes in a person, regardless of the level of consciousness. Let us not forget that the survivor cannot know anything about what has happened to them, and their understanding of the world has been significantly harmed. How many of these brain injury survivors are familiar with the sounds of an A&E department or an ITU ward? Maybe they've lost a limb. How would they ever realise that beyond feeling it? So my earliest realisations were, the first step was to become aware that I was not dead and that the place I was in was not heaven. The pressure to remain as a spectator was immense, a huge internal battle that could have so easily seen me give up and to remain in my subconscious. My senses and memory were significantly damaged. I could hear noises but could not open my eyes nor move. I can still clearly remember how frighteningly close I came to believing that I should get used to this state of mind, of spectatorship that I was in, thinking that that was reality. I used to have intensely debilitating and very frequent recurring nightmares about exactly that, up until about 2008. In fact, it's what led me to begin my degree in 2009. The question I asked myself, even now, or up until then, was where would I be if I did succumb to spectatorship? So the second recovery stimuli, the importance of professionals understanding and appreciating the vulnerability of a person who has suffered ABI. Not to patronise or belittle, but simply encourage and aid. Early and ongoing assessment is crucial to encourage recovery and could potentially save a considerable amount of money in the long run. It is vital to realise the strength of influence that the care team around the survivor has. It is somewhat felt throughout my recovery that many of the professionals working with me didn't appear to understand what had happened, didn't appear to understand anything about the brain or of memory. So everything changes, everything you know about yourself has changed, the place you are in has lost all familiarity. It's terrifying, but you've got to learn how to work with it. Not only has the survivor been through a major trauma, there are many other factors, as well as the trauma itself, that the survivor must learn to cope with and to understand. Bear in mind that the survivor can only have a very limited understanding, if any at all, of what's happened to them. Factors include environmental changes, bodily changes, thinking, reasoning and understanding that inevitably alter themselves and everyone and everything around them, in addition to resolving the period of non-existence resulting from their coma, which the survivor is entirely oblivious to. Time itself had stopped during that period. I suggest that the psychological changes and confusion that this inflicts on a survivor is the most paralysing and frightening phenomena, and one that may never be fully overcome without appropriate help. The third recovery stimuli, The importance of the right environment for rehabilitation. Being in a stimulating and inspiring environment is essential to avoid submission to spectatorship. Hospital and rehabilitation centres are quite alien places to the average person who does not spend much time in one, and thus can only exacerbate the feeling of spectatorship. And so it becomes quite essential to help the survivor feel as comfortable and secure as possible, such as to encourage their focus on what is familiar to them. The brain. Everyone involved in ABI rehabilitation needs to be aware of the influential power of their words and actions, which can encourage or hinder recovery. Neurotransmitters, action potentials, and their frequencies travel through the brain's neural networks of axons and synapses. It houses everything that its recipient knows, feels, and does. In order for the brain to rewire itself to suit the survivor's innate personality and functioning, then their environment must be conducive to that. The whole brain constitutes to who we are as individuals. When it is damaged, the confusion that prevails is overwhelming. Spectatorship can potentially become the only plausible option. The brain is our own personal and magnificent thinking machine that, I believe, is catastrophically underestimated to our own detriment. One realises how significantly we have been conditioned to think and act the way we do, call it nature nurture, or even fight or flight. I strongly feel that current rehabilitation treatments do sometimes overlook the fact that an ABI survivor in acute or post-acute care can have none of those impulses. It seems to encourage spectatorship rather than recovery. I believe that early and ongoing assessment is vital. Not only does psychometric testing enable therapists to monitor progress, it also allows the survivor to learn and recall more about life skills. I wanted to include this beautiful illustration that I found on the internet. I have had permission from Bryant, the illustrator. Note that the illustrator makes an important distinction. I am the left brain, I know exactly who I am. And I am the right brain, I am everything I wanted to be. The left and right hemispheres are separate entities of thought, and if you've grown up with a right hemisphere bias and you suffer an ABI to the right, then the thought processes of the left need help to become established. The fourth recovery stimuli, the importance of cognitive stimulation as well as physiotherapy. The functionality of right and left hemispheres demonstrates the importance of cognitive stimulation and vocational understanding. It allows the survivor to find out and relearn how they themselves process information. This is the beginning of self-awareness, self-control and problem-solving, and also becomes the only means to reduce anxiety and panic attacks that are so prevalent. It's like the survivor has to learn everything again over and over because everything is new all of the time until the penny drops and they have a realization, an awakening moment. But until that happens, it is overwhelmingly frustrating, especially when the rehabilitative system is such a distracting one with seemingly irrelevant tasks. And also when you find that you can no longer do the things that came so naturally to you before. So Colin Blakemore absolutely nailed it when he said, in the broadest sense, learning is the acquisition of knowledge, and memory is the storage of an internal representation of that knowledge. He goes on to say, without the capacity to remember and to learn, it is difficult to imagine what life would be like whether it could be called living at all. He's an amazing man. Read up all of his things on memory. It will help you. So memory and rehearsal are key to recovery. Without memory, one lives in a constant state of bewilderment. Thus, spectatorship might potentially be the only option available for an individual to cope. Such is the nature of fight or flight. But through repetition and rehearsal, inspiration and encouragement, in whatever state of dependence, the brain does rewire. The entire brain is used for memory. Such are the complexity of neuronal pathways. There is a clear distinction between declarative and procedural memory pathways, and I believe that this is a key skill for an ABI survivor to need to differentiate. And this should be a focus of rehabilitation. To aid this, 3 methodical processes must be introduced to the survivor, repeatedly and tactfully: encoding, consolidation, and retrieval. Regardless of their level of consciousness, while they are alive, we must assume that their subconscious is still functioning. So my personality entirely changed, but over time it returned, and that was until I became more comfortable and stable with the person I am now, and when my family and friends got used to me as I am now too. Far more could be done to encourage familiarization, encourage focus, even while in unconscious states, and I encourage the use of mnemonics and cues to a far greater extent than they are now, bearing in mind the senses of sound, touch, and smell, as well as hearing. The 5th recovery stimuli: the importance of professionals and family and friends supporting people in the right way to enable them to develop their confidence, self-esteem, and independence. Family and friends and staff interactions can help the survivor's familiarization with who they are and how they think. Care workers and staff can potentially help to focus the survivor's thoughts onto their recovery, even when they're still unconscious, with prompts and periods of rest and stimulation. Because everything is an effort, it's far easier to sit and do nothing, and this is a huge temptation for an ABI survivor. But the risk of doing nothing is immense. The long-term repercussions far outweigh the initial feelings of fear, frustration, and anger in overcoming such resistance. The idea might be to begin towards achieving smaller goals and to learn things again in increments. The fascinating bit is that as the brain rewires, whole recollections and original skills can be recognized and recalled. I called these my penny drop moments. So the 6th recovery stimuli: the importance of time being afforded to the ABI sufferer. I would say that my recovery was significantly impeded by the rush of society wanting me to conform to its ways, but it didn't actually understand the complications and residual effects of my injuries in any way. Therefore, I relied on the remarkable achievements I'd made pre-morbidly and take significant risks to aid my own recovery, risks that might well have led to very embarrassing and potentially calamitous situations. But I was always careful and gave each hurdle considerable thought. The last thing I wanted to do was to make matters worse than they already were. From my experience of recent years, strategies to alleviate anxiety should be a vital consideration, perhaps even while the survivor is an inpatient following post-acute care. Anxiety and panic attacks are inevitable when memory is not established, but through steps of recognition, realization, and rehearsal, anxiety can be alleviated to some extent. The issue is that it is difficult to acknowledge the extent of diffuse injury. However, the brain's plasticity is remarkable, and with a methodical approach, I believe that this can be enhanced. When I did come out of hospital, my frustration turned to a constant state of anxiety that I wasn't expecting at all, and then to agoraphobia. It was overwhelming and clearly worried my parents and my friends. This lasted for over 5 years. So, overcoming anxiety. Using the services and resources available to me in the hospital and at the rehabilitation centres had a limit to what I could learn from them. There was far more that I needed to learn than they would, than occupational therapy or physiotherapy I was receiving allowed. I needed to learn how to engage with the world and to recognise that I have as much right to be here as anyone else, to overcome the overwhelming effort of doing things for myself, to familiarise and to rehearse, to encourage, stimulate and inspire myself, to work within my limitations and difficulties, to find the best possible solution to grow and learn, to learn theory of mind, to see things from another's point of view. That was a difficult one. And I think that's probably a result of institutionalisation to a certain extent, that I couldn't see outside of my little box. So the 7th recovery stimuli. How the survivor wants nothing more than to be as they were again. This is only heightened as their memories of childhood and of the person they were before return. But I had to learn how to be as gentle with myself as possible. Slowly stimulate on myself and to allow my brain to rewire naturally. I watched hours and hours of snooker just because it's all I could cope with. But I questioned how they managed to pocket those balls so effortlessly. And when I watched Ronnie O'Sullivan pocket his 147 in the quickest of times live on TV, it was a realisation when I understood that it was all about practice and rehearsal. So finally, early and regular assessment could save money in the long term. I used to look forward to my psychometric testing sessions, however mundane. To me, it felt like I was achieving something, and there were moments of realisation in doing these tests. If only these were encouraged more. But my communication and memory and my physical restrictions made this impossible to request. This was a huge lost opportunity for me, and I can easily recall the frustration and impatience I would feel when I could not do more of these things for lack of communicating. I think it could have been noticed and conveyed to my family substantially better. The Calibri scale and the FIM-FAM scale are clinically approved measures of brain injury impairment, but I would like to see more subjective strategies devised that encourages self-awareness through both specifically the conventional and eccentric means, taking into account the left and right hemisphere biases. I believe that this can be attained. All the psychometric testing is helpful to both survivor and professional alike. The survivor will still want and need a clearer picture of their capabilities, so more objective measures should be made readily accessible to them. Thank you for listening to me. I will leave you with the 7 recovery stimuli.